Hello, this is Mrs. Lockie, and today I'll be modeling how to annotate a poem in order to demonstrate a close reading of a poem. So at the top of your page where it says I want you to write our learning target for today. I can annotate to demonstrate a close reading of a poem. So copy that on your paper. Now we've already read the poem twice in class, and I'm following the how to read a poem steps that are on page 6 in your packet. So step 1 says read the poem all the way through at least twice. Well, we already did that as a class, so I'm going to move to step 2, which is find the literal meaning of the poem. So the literal meaning just means what is the poem about. So I'm going to go stanza by stanza and kind of just summarize each stanza for the literal meaning of the poem. So the first stanza is just a description of a man and fields. And as I'm typing on the document, I would like you to also annotate on your paper. So next to stanza 1, copy description of man and fields. And then stanza 2 is a description of woman, child, and house. I'm going to bold that so you can see that a little better. And then stanza 3, the literal meaning is that it basically describes an abandoned farmhouse. So description of abandoned Okay, so the third stanza is about, just a description of the abandoned farmhouse and describes how the family left quickly or hastily left. Okay, so this poem literally, the literal meaning is pretty straightforward, easy to understand. There are 3 parts to step 2. So find the literal meaning we just did. 2A says write down words you don't know. So look over the poem and choose a highlighter from the bin at your table and highlight any words that you don't know. So as I'm looking over the poem, there's really only one word that I don't know. I'm not familiar with the word oilcloth, so I'm going to highlight that in orange. And I'm just going to go to dictionary.com and look up what this word means. Okay, so oilcloth is a cotton fabric made waterproof by being treated with oil and pigment for use as tablecloths, shelf coverings, and the like. Okay, and that would make sense because in the context of the poem, it talks about the kitchen shelves covered with oilcloth, so it's like a waterproof shelf covering. Okay, referring back to how to read a poem, 2B, we just did 2B, use a dictionary, the internet, or footnotes to look up the unknown word. So we just did that, and the dictionary definition of a word is the word's denotation. And then step 2C says determine the theme of the poem, the idea the poet wants to express. And see this area at the bottom of your page? That's where I'm going to type some notes about different things I notice when I read the poem. Okay, so when I think about theme or the idea the poet wants to express, this poem seems to be about feelings of failure and their harsh living conditions on the farm, and those feelings of failure and harsh living conditions make the people living in this home kind of give up and hastily abandon their house. So for theme, I'm just going to type, and you can write this on your paper, feelings of failure and harsh living conditions can cause people to give up and hastily abandon their home. Okay, and then referring back to the steps for how to read a poem, step 3 says examine the title. Okay, so this poem, the title is Abandoned Farmhouse. Now here this title really matches the poem because each stanza has description that describes an abandoned farmhouse. So like in the first stanza, the fields are cluttered with boulders and there's a leaky barn, so that implies that the farmhouse has been abandoned. And then in the last stanza, it describes a weed-choked yard, so the yard's been sort of neglected, an empty house, so it's abandoned. It was abandoned quickly, and toys are strewn in the yard like branches after a storm. So here the title matches the description in the poem very closely. Okay, step 4 says consider the tone and then who is speaking. So tone is the speaker's attitude towards the subject of the poem. So here for the speaker, go down to the notes part of your page. Speaker, it's an unknown narrator. So it's a unknown narrator who's sort of outside the poem, describing this family and the abandoned farmhouse. I'm not going to share my ideas about what words I would use to describe the tone because students will be doing that later, so we're just going to move on to the next step. Step 5 says look at the structure of the poem. How is it organized and divided? How are the stanzas and sections related? Okay, so when I'm looking at the poem again, there's 3 clear stanzas. If I count the lines in each stanza, there's 8 lines in each stanza. So in your notes, while you're annotating, you can write structure, 3 stanzas, 8 lines each. Okay, and there's a question, how are the stanzas and sections related? So in this poem, like the first stanza describes the man or the farmer and his fields. The second stanza describes the woman, child, and house. And the third stanza describes how the family abandoned the farmhouse quickly. So I would say the stanzas are related because they describe each person in the family, like the man and woman are described separately, and the child's described along with the woman. So sort of like each stanza describes a person, and then the third stanza is focused more on the house. Step 6 says, listen to the sound and rhythm of the poem. Are there patterns? Does the poet use rhymes? Does the poem use special effects like alliteration to get your attention? Looking over the poem again, I'm looking at the words at the end of the lines. I don't notice any rhyme, but I do notice alliteration. There's a lot of alliteration. So I want you to take a pencil or a pen and underline the first letter as I underline letters on this document to show alliteration. So says the size of his shoes. So repetition of the S sound. In the fourth line, there's repetition of the G sound. A good, God-fearing man. God-fearing man. And then in the next line, the Bible with a broken back. In the last line of this stanza, boulders and barn show alliteration. Looking at the second stanza, in the fourth line, we have alliteration with tractor tire. And then we have alliteration with the P sound in plum preserves. And then here we have the S sound with sealed and cellar. So cellar starts with a C, but it's an S sound. Okay, and then how about in the third stanza? Why don't you read through the third stanza again on your own and underline words that start with the same sound. I'll give you a minute to do that on your own document. Okay, let's check to see if you found alliteration in the third stanza. So the alliteration that I noticed was the S sound in still sealed jars in the cellar. Say, all of these have the S sound. Say, she left in a nervous haste. Okay, we have strewn, the ST sound, and storm with the ST sound, and then we have the R sound in rubber and rusty. So if you missed any of these, go ahead and underline those consonant sounds at the beginning of the word. So that's alliteration. The next step in the How to Read a Poem says, Step 7, pull it all together by examining the language and symbolism within the poem. These elements work together to create the connotative meaning. So the connotative meaning is a meaning that words have beyond the dictionary definition. Symbolism. So here I think the abandoned farmhouse is a symbol. The abandoned farmhouse, I think, symbolizes failure